Imagine you're on a plane at 30,000 feet. Suddenly, the pilot announces, "We're having some trouble with the controls." Then he gives every passenger a button and says, "Don't worry, we're going to vote on what I should do next." You'd probably look around and think, "Wait, why are we voting?" Because when the consequences are serious, we usually trust someone who actually knows what they're doing. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Socrates asked whether politics should work differently. More than 2,000 years ago in ancient Athens, democracy gave citizens the power to participate directly in political decisions. Today, democracy sounds almost inseparable from freedom. But Socrates looked at it and saw a dangerous question. What happens when people are allowed to make important decisions without actually understanding what they're deciding? Socrates didn't simply say, "Democracy is evil." His criticism was more disturbing. He questioned whether popularity could be mistaken for wisdom. Think about how people discover information today. You open TikTok or YouTube and see someone confidently explaining a complicated political issue in 45 seconds. They speak clearly, they look confident, the comments are going crazy, and suddenly you feel like you understand the issue. But here's the problem. Confidence isn't knowledge. Popularity isn't truth. And being persuasive doesn't mean being right. Socrates understood this thousands of years before algorithms existed. He spent his life asking people questions, not because he thought he had every answer, but because he wanted to expose something humans hate admitting. We often believe we know things we haven't actually examined. Imagine someone saying, "Justice means helping your friends." Socrates wouldn't immediately disagree. He'd ask, "What if your friend is doing something wrong?" Then they'd answer. He'd ask another question, then another. Eventually, the person might discover that their simple definition doesn't work anymore. That's the Socratic Method, and honestly, it's brutal. Because most arguments aren't really about discovering the truth. They're about protecting the position we already chose. You've probably experienced this online. You see a political post, you instantly agree or disagree. Then you read the comments. Someone attacks your opinion. You immediately want to respond. But for a second, ask yourself, are you trying to find the truth or are you trying to win? Socrates would have cared about that difference, because democracy depends on citizens making decisions. And if citizens are easily manipulated by emotion, popularity, fear, or persuasive speeches, then democracy can become vulnerable. Ancient Athens eventually demonstrated the danger in Socrates' own life. He was put on trial and accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the city's gods. A large jury found him guilty. Think about the irony. The man who spent his life questioning the judgment of society was ultimately condemned by society's judgment. Socrates could have escaped. He didn't. He accepted the sentence even though he believed the verdict was unjust. And that creates the uncomfortable paradox at the heart of his criticism. A majority can agree and still be wrong. That's something we still struggle with today. A video gets 10 million views, and suddenly people assume it must be true. A celebrity says something confidently, and millions repeat it. An opinion becomes popular, and questioning it starts to feel almost offensive. But truth doesn't count votes. The earth doesn't become flat because millions believe it is. And an argument doesn't become correct because everyone in your group chat agrees with it. This is why Socrates feels strangely modern. He lived without smartphones, social media, or algorithms. Yet he understood something about human psychology that the internet constantly exposes. People don't just want information. They want information that confirms what they already believe. And that's where democracy becomes complicated. The problem isn't necessarily that ordinary people have a voice. The problem is what happens when people stop questioning themselves. Because a society full of confident people who never examine their beliefs can be easier to manipulate than a society full of people willing to admit, I might be wrong. Maybe that's what Socrates was really afraid of, not democracy itself, but ignorance disguised as certainty. And perhaps that's why his philosophy still matters. Before you believe the politician, question the politician. Before you follow the crowd, question the crowd. Before you defend your opinion, question your opinion. And before you assume you know, ask yourself one uncomfortable question. How do I actually know? Because for Socrates, wisdom didn't begin when you had all the answers. It began when you became humble enough to admit that you might not have them.